Welcome to the DVC webinar on Saving Democracy, where we are most pleased to welcome back David Pepper to talk about his most recent book and his work around saving democracy. We first heard from David back in January 2022, where he talked about his previous book, Laboratories of Autocracy. So we are most pleased to welcome him back. We're also pleased to welcome all of you, our friends in the Democratic Party, in resistance groups of all kinds, here in Silicon Valley and now across the country. We had registrations from 28 different states for this webinar, and we're pleased to welcome all of you. The DVC, the Democratic Volunteer Center, started in Silicon Valley to support volunteers, you, by providing space, infrastructure, resources, being always on and always funded for the elections that come. And we have worked with you at the local level, at the state level, and at every national election since 2010. And we're pleased to be preparing now for 2024 with this series of webinars about what's important to all of us. I particularly want to highlight a couple of partners that we work with that are very relevant to the state first message that you will hear from David. The Sister District Project has been uniquely focused on state races. You should absolutely consider joining them and learning more about the individual states that they target. Field Team 6 is focused on registering voters across the country. And as you'll hear from David, we need to get more voters registered. And the Democratic Volunteer Center, you can read more about us at demvolctr.org. Please consider donating to these organizations that we work with once you've heard everything that David has to say. The agenda for our meeting included an introduction by Sue Hildebrand, our partner from the California Democratic Party, the Northern Organizer. We will go straight into hearing David Pepper, and then I will conduct a question and answer session with your questions afterwards. Due to a slight technical issue, we won't hear David say welcome, but you will hear him start on a discussion of his trip to Iowa. And you can read more about that at his Substack, which is a fascinating story. So without further ado, let's hear from David Pepper.
So I was excited to be there. Smaller crowd than they would have had if it was Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, but it was a lot of fun, but it was also a reminder of the battle we're in. I look at Iowa and this is a state that voted for Obama. It's a state that had Democrats as governor, as senator. That was not very long ago. And now it's a state like every other state going through this downward spiral of extremism. It's just a reminder, and I'll talk about this over the next couple of minutes. The front line of democracy, their front line, those attacking it, are the state houses of places like Iowa. And if we're going to fight back, we're going to fight back by going there too. And one of the inspiring things about Iowa is there were some really amazing stories about people taking on extremists in tough areas and winning. And I'll talk about that later too. So it was a reminder of the problem, but also, and I'll share this in an upcoming sort of newsletter I do, there were some really interesting examples of people who took on nearly impossible races against election deniers and won them. And that's what we have to do. So I'm both sobered by my trip to Iowa, but also uplifted. And I want to share some of that now. And by the way, I also want to say, give condolences to the loss of your senator a few days ago. When I was young, I watched her and was always an admirer of hers. And you all have probably seen what I've been watching the last couple of days, the videos of her, whether it was in San Francisco right after the assassinations or when she won the Senate race. What a giant and what a legacy. So obviously, all across the country, we thank her and her family for what a legacy and what a life she led. So it was obviously our condolences at her loss, but our honor of her work. Let me cut right to a slide. And Larry, I appreciate you saying you think maybe this is my most important slide. Some of you, if you were on a couple of years ago, you will have seen some of this. A lot of it is new. But after the time I spoke to you, I started presenting in a different order, just to get right to the quick about what's happening. And the problem, as I see it, and this slide tries to summarize the issue. we have for a long time viewed in America, at least on the left, and I'd say even the center, the mainstream media, we've really witnessed, or we really watch American politics, and we sort of very simply summarize it as a single battle between red and blue. And every couple of years, we have this battle in these swing states of red and blue, and one side wins, the other side loses, and then we start over again and do it 2 years later. And in the way we describe that, now this is changing more lately. People are waking up to this, but for a long time, that's been our mindset. And my worry is, the more I've written and the more I presented to groups like yours a year and a half ago, that when we think about it that way, we're actually blinding ourselves to the real problem. And we're blinding ourselves to how we can be more effective in fighting back. And this is what I opened the second book on, but I want to talk about it here. There really are two battles in American politics. We're fighting one, but we haven't looked close enough at the other. And that's why even when we think we're winning, we're not. So what's the side on the left's battle? And I don't mean left politically, but I mean the left side of this slide. This is, and again, it's Democrats. I'd say it's independents. Think about it this way: major mainstream media, even some moderate Republicans. This side brings to the battle two assumptions about politics, I believe. One is an assumption that democracy is pretty much intact. Now, that's changing very recently, but this side has sort of been waging a battle, not that worried that democracy could literally be undermined dramatically or go away. So it hasn't really been focused on that as much as it needs to be. We'll talk about that later. So democracy is intact, one assumption. Second assumption, that this side is confident that it represents mainstream views in the way it wages its battle. All right, stop.
0 seconds left in the game.
Jack, I can't talk right now. We wage the battle confident that we represent a majority viewpoint. And we're right to think that. We see it all around the country right now. Pardon the interruption, by the way. It was a football update from my 9-year-old. America's pro-choice, so are we. America wants common sense gun reform. That's what we fight for. America wants something done about climate change. On and on and on. America believes in a middle-class based economics, public education, you name it. So when we talk about the things that we talk about, we're confident that if we talk about them well, we can win. Those are the two assumptions I think we bring to our battle, and that shapes the battle that we bring, which is that our basic battle, as this slide shows, is we're fighting over election outcomes, saying what we're for. And if we win those elections, then we get to do the things we promised to do, the mainstream things we promised to do. And of course, that very quickly has us focused on federal elections, because that's where we think most things are going to get done. And because because we're so confident in the state of democracy, we're not looking at the heart of it. We're looking at the federal elections. And because we're looking at federal elections, we very quickly start focusing on swing states. And we focus especially in federal years. And when we win that battle, as we've defined it, which is swing states for federal years, so we win the presidency, the Senate, and the House, like we did in 2008, like we did in 2020, we literally celebrate as if we've won the entire political battle. And the problem is, that would be true if it were the other side's political battle. And this is the problem. It's not their battle. Their battle is very different. They bring to their battle, I'll do this very quickly, the two opposite assumptions are the ones I've just mentioned. One, they don't assume democracy is intact. They actually know the reality, which is democracy can be undermined, has been all the time. It's our nation's history. It's our world history. And that there are certain institutions that can undermine democracy. They know that, even if we've been blind to it. Number two, they actually understand very cleanly that their agenda, I'll just give a sample of their agenda. They know that their agenda is mostly unpopular. That if the things they are trying to do, middle class, trickle-down economics and abortion bans and insane gun laws and giving away public school funds to private companies, they know all that's unpopular. So they know that if they simply run elections on their views, unlike us, that they'll lose those elections. They know that what happened in Kansas in that referendum is what's going to happen. Mitch McConnell knows that. That's why he told Lindsey Graham, don't bring up an abortion ban after Dobbs, etc. So knowing that their agenda would lose in a fair democracy, but also knowing that democracy can be undermined, their battle is a very different one. Their battle is over democracy itself. How can you subvert democracy enough to lock in a minority worldview that would never win in a fair democracy? That is their battle. I've had people often say to me, more moderate, Republican types, David, are you really saying that they don't want democracy, that they really want to just undermine it so they get what they want? And the answer is, well, look at them, watch them. That's why they went to Orban. They went to Hungary to study Orban. That's why Peter Thiel, the guy who funded J.D. Vance's campaign, said democracy is inconsistent with freedom. And now the best example, and I'm sure a lot of you watched this closely, the best example that makes it so clear that that's their battle is this thing in August in Ohio that we had to defeat called Issue 1, where they knew that the pro-choice amendment this November in Ohio was popular. They know it polls in the mid-50s, so they tried to change the rules to make it so that we had to get to 60% to win. That's them acknowledging that they need to change the rules, rig democracy, to keep their 41% view as the winning view. So that's their battle. And as I went through in the prior presentation, if you read the first book, their battle does not end up being about those federal swing states. That's not the winning strategy to accomplish their battle. Their battle is state houses. That turns out, and I won't go through this in great detail. If you've heard me before, you've heard this. State houses turn out to be the perfect institutions to do their battle. They control every issue that they care about, that we care about, that they want to accomplish, that generally for them is a toxic minority worldview. These issues, abortion, guns, you name it, state houses do all that and more. State houses, as we've talked about many times, draw the rules of our democracy, whether it's who votes, how they vote, when they vote, how can you suppress them? If your goal in life is to have a minority worldview, you want to have your hands on those rules because you can help make sure the majority isn't voting through purging, through voter ID, a little bit here, a little bit there, and all of a sudden it's a lot harder for the majority to get its way. State houses are the place you can do that. Number two, they draw the district lines. By drawing the district lines, they can either draw a fully inclusive and representative democracy with accountability, or they can rig the whole thing. Well, they've been rigging the whole thing when they have a chance, doing it so that blue states become red states, not because of the people, but because of gerrymandering. Obama won these states in 08 and 12, same numbers, but the legislatures went in the opposite direction thanks to gerrymandering. They control these places even when they represent the minority. They do so, Wisconsin on the far right, maybe the most gerrymandered state in America. Even when Democrats won by 9 across the state, they still get a supermajority. Same kind of things happening in Ohio right now, super gerrymandering. And what they've done, and this is something I'm really convinced of, once they gerrymander these states, beyond just having majorities they haven't earned, and sometimes they're in the majority in the state house when they actually reflect the minority of that state. Even more poisonous is they've come up with a system where almost not a single member of their state houses is accountable, ever faces a real election. And I'll go through this later. These are the margins of victories in Ohio over 10 years, where they basically, almost every seat they draw themselves is a runaway race. But in the next book that I finished that we're talking about today, I took this one step further. Not only is it the case that they have a system with no accountability, in many of these places, no one's running against them whatsoever. They literally are running unopposed. All of this creates a system where these state houses, again, no accountability to the public, major interests who do understand the power, so they're looking for things from these state houses. You create a set of incentives in these states that are really warped. They have an incentive to give away public goods to the private sector because the public can't stop them, the private sector rewards them. They have an incentive to be extremists because all they worry about is the next primary. They don't worry about the general because all the elections are already predetermined. And then, of course, once you've committed yourself to a career of being extremist, passing laws like that, the law in Ohio that forced that 10-year-old rape victim to go to Indiana for care, something that less than 10% of Ohioans supported. Once you're a politician doing that type of thing, generating poor outcomes every step of the way because you're giving away, let's say, public school dollars to private for-profit scams, so your public schools are doing worse. Once that's your career, of course, the other incentive you have, the third from the bottom, is you have an incentive to attack democracy itself. Because if you ever had democracy come back into where you are as a politician, you would lose because you have an indefensible record. And so it turns out these state houses, and this is where they focus, are the perfect institution for them to accomplish their goal. And as I've talked about many times, they That's where they go. They don't care if it's a swing state for a federal election. They don't care if it's a federal election year. Their goal is to fight for every state house they can, win it, gerrymander the hell out of it, suppress the vote of the other side. And just like I saw in Iowa the other day, or Ohio or Florida, once they've got that, they can ram through their extremist agenda whenever they want to. And even when it's out of touch with that state, they can't be held accountable. That's why right now the same thing is happening in all these states. So that's their battle. That's our battle. Here's the problem. I think we all know this. If each of these two sides is fighting the battle I've described, who's going to win? The side on the right is obviously going to win. They're fighting the deeper battle. They're making progress all the time. We're generally looking at swing states in federal years. We think we're winning when we focus on those states, while they're winning all the time in all these states doing what I've described. Now, here's how problematic the battle is, and this is why we have to wake up to it. They've nationalized this. This isn't just a state-by-state thing. Nationally, the ALEC and the right wing have figured this out. They're doing this all over. That's why it feels so similar in every state. But when I say okay, so basically, I analogize this to a soccer game. They are always on offense. We are not on offense, but often it's even worse than this. We're not actually on defense in many of these places, and that accelerates the problem. So think about their offense in these states, shooting at the goal. There's Tennessee. There, we've seen what they do. There's Mississippi. That's the one that gave us Dobbs. There's Wisconsin trying to impeach a Supreme Court justice. There's Ohio and the 10-year-old rape victim do the abortion ban. There's Florida. There's Missouri. There's Texas. That's their offense. And we're hardly there. And oftentimes when they actually score, you've all heard this, when they score a goal like they did with Dobbs in Mississippi, our response often is, oh my gosh, we need to elect more U.S. senators to stop them. And that'd be like looking at this soccer field and seeing all these people shooting shots that we're not obstructing and literally saying, if only we had a better goalie, we'd win that game. That's kind of what we do. When we should be thinking, why are we challenging these shots? Why aren't we holding them accountable for being extremists? So that's why I say long term, when they're always on offense and we're not, it's a losing strategy. How much are we not on defense? And this is maybe the most shocking slide of the new book. I know it's a little small for you. Hopefully you can see this. These are the state houses in the country that I would call laboratories of autocracy. This is the list of each state, the number of people who are Republicans in these state houses who in 2022 did not face an opponent. So look closely. I mean, we're talking about 50% of those Tennessee Republicans. You've all seen how they've been behaving. That Tennessee Republican legislature, almost 50%, no opponent. In Georgia, when Stacey Abrams was running for governor, 53% of the Republicans in that state house, the ones who took water away from folks who were voting in line, no opponent. Texas, 42%. In Iowa, where I was, 33%. That's actually better than most. So when I say we're not playing defense, I don't mean overall just as a state. I mean in those states. We are letting these extremists run, essentially being little autocrats, and we don't even run against them. They get there again just by paying a filing fee and running. And that's the problem. And so what we have right now is a classic, I'll go back to this one, losing battle. We're fighting in swing states for federal elections. When we win, we celebrate. They're fighting for democracy itself. Their front line are these state houses. Most of what they're doing are through districts in those state houses that we're not even contesting. It's like they've got a highway or a super highway of extremism, and we're just standing back and saying, go right on through. We're not even going to run against you. And so this gets to the part about what we do about it all, because I hope, if you haven't seen this before, I know it's pretty bleak. I talk bluntly so that we see the problem, because only when we see it will we actually get over it and we will solve it. We have to reframe the battle, understand we're in the same battle for democracy that the other side has been in. We just haven't seen it as clearly as we need to. And it starts at the state level. That's the heart of their battle. That's where they control so much. And we, for too long, have let them do it with often, again, as you just saw, not even opposing what they're doing. There are a number of things that can become very clear. And the book I go through goes through a lot of specifics. But here's some of the basics. One, it's a long battle. Once you realize your battle for democracy, and you all know this, that's why, again, as Sue said, you wouldn't be on this call on a Sunday afternoon. It's a long battle. It's way beyond just the next federal election cycle. It's way beyond just the fact that we have to win in 24. It's on all the time. It's the August special election in Ohio. It's every school board race this November in the country. It's a special election that I just talked about in Iowa in August 28th, where we defeated an election denier in a Republican county. But it's even beyond elections. It's sort of every day, the work you're doing with Field Team 6 and others, registering voters, engaging voters, grabbing the voters that have been eliminated from our democracy through purging and getting them back into the game. I'll talk about how we do that. We have to see it as a long game. And those of you who heard me before, I always give the example. Stacey Abrams is the best example of someone who approached the Georgia battle as a long game for democracy. She didn't only focus on Senate races. She didn't quit after one bad year where it was red. She kept going, and look what she did. She saved Georgia, and in 2020 and 22, she kept it in the hands of Democrats for the presidency and Senate as well. That's a long game. We all need to be doing that. Number two, battle all 50 states. And I think you'll agree with this. Once we frame the battle of politics as only about a few swing states, we disempower almost every state except for about 12 of them who think, well, I must not be part of this battle because I'm not a swing state. It's Pennsylvania, it's Georgia, a couple others. But if I'm in a blue state or a red state, I'm not really in the middle of that battle. And my point is, absolutely you are. You are on the front line of these. You're on the front line. And we have to fight for democracy in all 50 states. That's where the battle is. And when we don't, what happens? The state I was in the other day, Iowa, that voted for Obama, when we're not even there at all because we haven't thought of them as a state that a presidential candidate could win, or Indiana or Ohio, states that we know are not that extreme or weren't that long ago, when we don't compete at all because we don't think they're good enough because they're not a federal swing state, we are allowing the extremists to take over these places. It's an absolutely self-defeating strategy to only focus on a few swing states because they win as federal elections. Once you realize you're in a battle for democracy itself, you realize you have to fight for that everywhere. And when you don't, there's massive cost to lives and to democracy itself when you let these states go through the downward spiral when there's no accountability pushing back against extremism. In other words, go to these states and start blocking the shots. Don't just sit around and hope for a federal election to save the day. That's kind of winning on the cheap. Go to these states and start contesting where they're taking the shots. Start holding them accountable. And it can be done. It is done. But it won't happen if you don't do it. Kansas, you never would have known that it was a pro-choice state the way we campaign. But when there was a referendum called, look what happened. We win. Number three, you got to run in every part of every state. Same concept. When we leave all those districts uncontested, we allow extremists to face no accountability. We allow one side to have all the message in most of America. Absolutely self-defeating strategy. And it's, again, why these state houses have become such downward spirals of extremism. They're going to keep acting the same way they are. It gets them ahead in their world if we don't actually hold them accountable and run against them. Again, block the shots where they're taken. People ask all the time, well, isn't it really hard to run everywhere? Well, of course it is. And people say, is there money for it? I would argue that you take just a sliver. Let's say this is the hypothetical Amy McGrath fundraising running against Mitch McConnell a few years ago. Take a sliver of her dollars, maybe a rounding error in the final TV buy, and you could fund dozens and dozens of candidates running in these state house districts that we aren't even competing in. And that $20 or $30 or $40,000 in that district would go so much further than the amount on television we're buying at the end of a race. So we got to get smarter about thinking about if we just are a little more disciplined in how we invest our money, we could be competing in far more many places. And that would really put the brakes on some of the extremism we're seeing. Number four, you've heard me say this, so much bigger than Donald Trump. We like to sort of equate all the attack on democracy to Donald Trump. I'm here to tell you that it all started before Trump ran. This was largely a response to Obama winning, a diverse majority getting its way. But if Donald Trump were locked up tomorrow, it would still continue, all of it. We know that. When we make it only about Trump, we actually, again, it's sort of like thinking about it all as a simple battle. We are making it far too simplistic about what's happening. And very consequentially, we are giving cover to a whole lot of Republicans who are just as aggressively attacking democracy as Donald Trump is, who may not sound as crazy as Donald Trump does. We have to stop doing that. And the last thing is, and I'm going to end on some optimism and go to your questions. Again, what I said before, once we all realize, and you all realize this, that we are on the front line of the battle of democracy wherever we are. My hope is people see there's so much more we can all do about it. If you're in Oklahoma, although you may not be blue for the presidential year next year, you have 60% of the districts of your state uncontested at 22. You can help solve that. Start recruiting. If you're in New York State, that low turnout due to poor voting laws in New York State cost us a number of House seats, probably the majority. Get to work registering voters in New York State so we get that majority back. California, we can win back the House through California. We know that. So beyond what you're doing helping us in other states, which you guys do an incredible job at, we got work to do in California to make sure we get the turnout and the messages and the recruiting done to win those House seats back in California. The front line is everywhere. And that means there's so much more we all can do. And the concept I go through in the book that I hope people take away, and I'm going to share my a couple things when I'm done here, links. We all have a footprint in this world of things that we do in life beyond our daily political work. And what I challenge people to do in this book is think about everything you're doing, all the networks you have, all the communications, all the people you serve in your day job. Put it all to work for democracy. The scale of the attack on democracy is enormous. It's full time. It's billions of dollars from the Koch brothers. We too often only spend a real sliver of our footprint fighting for democracy. And that's why the scale against it is so much bigger than the scale fighting for it. But if we all find the ways, and I just give examples in the second book, a health clinic that decides to start registering everyone who comes through their doors, a food bank, every city hall in America deciding, hey, if you're a citizen of my city, Cincinnati, when you come to our rec center, when you come to our library, when you come through our doors, we're going to make sure you're also registered. If everyone were to incorporate lifting voters into everything they did, the results would change overnight. Just like if every precinct executive of a precinct somewhere in America decided to own their precinct and really work it, results would change. So the book says once you realize you're on the front line, you can take your footprint and do really powerful things for democracy beyond giving some money, beyond making a few phone calls that you've never thought of before. And it matters because you're on the front line. I won't go through this one. So in closing, let me just say, as much as I'm presenting some somewhat sort of bleak topics, I'm an optimist about where we are right now. The Republicans have been right, the far right. They understand, and they are right, that their extremism is not popular. And when we expose their extremism, and it's exposed now, Dobbs exposed it. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and Vivek and all those election deniers running for Secretary of State, they have exposed how extreme they are. The mission of Mitch McConnell of keeping it quiet has failed. And what's happening because of that? As much as things are stressful when we watch Washington, we've got a heck of a winning streak going, don't we? We won in Kansas last August. We defeated every election denying Secretary of State candidate in November, all across the country in swing states. We flipped the Michigan State House and the Pennsylvania State House in November. We win the Wisconsin Supreme Court race in April. We win the Ohio issue 1. We win specials that we shouldn't be winning in years where we have the White House. What's happening is there is an army, and you're part of it, of democracy champions building that understands that fights in states really matter, and the extremism is becoming more clear to voters. And when those things pair up, we're actually winning. We have a year-long winning streak in a year that you're supposed to lose, and our goal has to be to keep it going. And in closing, I'll simply say, my worry about a presidential year is that we get distracted and think the only thing we have to do to win the battle for democracy is win the presidency. That's clearly not the case, or it would have been over after 2020. Our goal right now, win Virginia in November, win these amendments like the one in Ohio in November, win school board races in November, be recruiting to get people running everywhere across this country for the year 2024. And then as we build towards 24 and engage everyone we can through our footprint, by the summer and fall of 24, run the extremist contrast, not just Biden and Trump like we did in 20 as if that was the only election on the ballot. Run that contrast all the way down to State House and lower, if you have elections lower. And that way, when we reelect Joe Biden, I assume he's going to be the candidate, and defeat Trump, we're not just having a 20-year where that's the only big thing we accomplish. We're actually gaining more and more ground at all levels because we've actually been fighting the broader battle for democracy and not only a federal battle. So with that, I'll stop talking. Would love to take your questions. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm going to go through some of the questions that we're getting from you through the Q&A button, and also those of you who registered had the opportunity to answer questions. So welcome back to the DVC. And I want to sort of start out with where you see the necessary action coming from. Have you seen changes in the Democratic Party itself? Is it lots of different groups around the country? Is it individuals? What in your travels is giving you sort of hope that people are kind of responding to the urgency of this situation? And where do you see the action coming from?
Yeah, great question. So I think the Democratic Party is doing better than it did, let's say, when I first became chair. I think the last couple of chairs have pushed more into states. I think it needs to be done more, but I think they've pushed more dollars into states beyond the swing states. I think, though, we have to figure out how to do it even more. What gives me the best hope is, frankly, the groups like the ones on this call. There is a grassroots infrastructure that values running everywhere that is building. And there's some wonderful groups that are building it. Sister District is building it. States Project is building it. Run for Something is building it. And so they are all there, and they're starting to, in their work. I mean, the results of 2022 show that when the bigger army of democracy champions who see this go fight a race like, the Nevada Secretary of State race or the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, when we all say, wow, that's a race for democracy, let's get involved, we're winning them. And a lot of the infrastructure that's helping us win them are these groups that are building, that are actually getting more and more effective. So we don't have to reinvent a whole lot, I don't think. We don't have to go create a bunch of new organizations. What I think we have to do, and this is part of what I do when I try and communicate with some of the sort of the progressive VIPs, is these groups have to not be seen as peripheral. These are core mission. These are core mission groups that we too often think of as sort of the junior varsity, while we give everything to the DSCC, the DCCC, as if that's all we have to do. And so they're there, they're working. People are more aware of them, like those on this call. But we've got to be smarter about seeing that, just like the Koch brothers think of ALEC as the core to an operation to undermine democracy through states, we have to think of the organizations that are beginning to that support running everywhere. We have to think of them in a way that's more central and give them the support and the attention and get them up to a bigger scale so they can do this very important task. But they are building. And by the way, since that call we had, I think February of last year, I've gotten to know them all a lot better. And there's some really, really good groups out there doing this work. So
your recommendation is go join those groups, volunteer today, work on today's elections. Don't be in a question where you say, what elections are today? There's all kinds of elections happening.
Here's an example. We should all know, we always know what the U.S. Senate races are, right? Everyone can tell you, oh, here are the 5. Know the state houses just the same. Know that the next month in Virginia, could determine if there's an abortion ban in Virginia next year, or voter suppression in Virginia going to presidential. A Pennsylvania Supreme Court race is up for grabs. One of the most important institutions in America in the last couple of years has been a Pennsylvania Supreme Court that has stood up for democracy. We can't afford to lose that over the next couple of years. There is an open seat this November. So those on this call, I'm sure Sister District is doing work in Virginia. I'm sure Field Team 6 is. Ask them, how can I help in Virginia right now? And then we roll into next year. So the groups are there, and we just need to all see them as vital. And people are seeing this. That's why I had this winning streak going. But here's my concern. Donald Trump is clearly a mortal threat to our country's democracy. We must defeat him. But we can't only do that. We have to still focus on these state level races all the way through next November. And by the way, it's not zero sum either. If we run in every district in Arizona and every district in Georgia, we're also helping Joe Biden win those states too, aren't we?
Various questions from Judith, Bill, Elisan, Herb, and some questions today from Susan and also Daniel about how do we get people to vote? How do we communicate the urgency of the situation? How do we get people to participate? Obviously, you have on the call here a lot of volunteers, but what should they be saying to more people to bring them in?
So that's a great question. So first of all, I'm going to drop one thing here. I have a Substack that I now do that's always talking about all this stuff for those who are interested. The book answers all these things as well. But two things. One, I mentioned this, I'm sure, on the call we talked to before. A lot of voters, this 30,000-foot discussion over democracy is not the thing that's going to get them involved. So one of the things I try and encourage people to do is think about the lives people are living and how the attack on democracy impacts them. And it impacts them. Maybe the most clear-cut example that's leading to higher turnout right now is Dobbs. It impacts them and when they only have 4 days of school a week in a lot of states, which they have now. And so we have to try and translate the problem of democracy into real terms. And so what I'd say, and if you're in your own community doing this work, think about the issues that are one of my theories that I believe is being borne out all over the country is these corrupted state houses. As I mentioned, they don't have an incentive to deliver good public outcomes because they get reelected no matter what. That means that the public outcomes in these places like Iowa or Ohio are failing badly. And so one of the things I would focus on is you can explain to people how that failed outcome, the dwindling schools, the broken infrastructure, all that. Remember Gretchen Whitmer when she ran for governor of Michigan, fix the damn roads. The governor of Kansas, now a Democrat, she ran basically on fixing the schools. So I think translating a lot of this stuff to the issues that people are concerned about every day is important. The other one I'd say is, and there's a lot in the book about this, we have to be smart, not just candidates, although candidates in particular. We have to be smart about when we run to the middle with milquetoast messages, we often are not inspiring our own voters to show up. You need a message that inspires people. That if they've decided, to your question, if we're talking about the voters who've decided, and there are many of them, that democracy isn't changing their life, that politics is so silly, so broken, it's not worth it. A knock on a door with a month to go, just desperately pleading with them to vote is not going to change that. We need messaging about real issues. And this is where I get into things like Dobbs, student debt. I mean, things that really are hitting them hard in their life to show them. And one other thing I'd say here, and this is a thing I've really become a big believer in. One reason to use your footprint, to reach out to voters and not simply your party hat is sometimes the best communicators about why people should vote won't be that partisan. Here's an example. Imagine the health clinic that has decided to register every single voter that comes through the doors of that health clinic. How effective do you think it is versus some random person chasing you down at, in a public market? Hey, are you registered? How much more effective do you think it is if the doctor who just served you or helped you get better says, hey, are you registered? You really should be. Or the person who helped you at the food bank or the homeless shelter saying, one thing we want from you is if we can help you is to get you into democracy. Why don't you register? So I think the other thing is the more we have community organizations incorporating into their footprint lifting democracy, I think and this would be a great thing for everyone on this call to do. What organizations do you know of that could do this? I think those organizations being the communicator to voters that democracy matters. Here's how you can register. Here's the upcoming election. All that is nonpartisan work. I think those communicators and those ambassadors are probably better than your typical partisan. So we can do all of that. But I think that could make a huge difference long-term. And my frustration, and once you hear me say this, I think you'll be frustrated too. Far too few organizations that can be lifting democracy, the very constituents that have been removed from our democracy are doing it. And with a little training and a little investment, they all could be doing it at a massive scale.
So what I take from that is if you're going to be relevant, you've got to be more local. It's not this general Trump or anti-Trump story. It's what's happening to healthcare right down in your district.
Yeah. And as helping people, message-wise, absolutely. But also as you're serving people in different ways that you might be part of the community, incorporate it into that service and not have it just a separate political activity. Because sometimes if the person's like not into politics, If you chase them down, hey, I got my little board, I'm going to sign you up. They might not want to deal with you there. But if the nonprofit that you volunteer for is saying, we're going to help everyone who comes through our rec center's doors, that may be the better place to do it. So think about all the other ways that you're interacting with people beyond politics that could be incorporated into that mission.
So that absolutely means for those of us here sitting in blue districts, perhaps blue districts in California, we've got to be working in small districts through some organization that will help us do it, like Sister District, States Project, or whatever local group or Field Team 6 or whatever group you choose. Find somewhere so that you can understand the local issues and talk local.
Absolutely.
A number of people, Elizabeth, Rosemary, Herb, Cecily, Carol, asked various variations of how on earth did we get here? Citing Trump, MAGA extremism, insurrection, violence, Fox News, misinformation, Supreme Court, etc. You cover in both your books, the sort of history of this. This isn't new, is something you say. Can you talk a bit more about our American history that has brought us here?
Yeah, I mean, we are living the history. If we thought we were somehow the first generation of Americans immune from being part of the battle of democracy, we now know we were wrong. We're in the same battle. This is the history of our country. Whenever a diverse majority has come together, like they did when Obama went and said, hey, we're in charge now, our votes add up to a majority. There's always, and when that majority is diverse and anchored, particularly in Black voters, there's always been a fierce backlash. That's how we got Jim Crow. So we're in that now. And when someone says, how do we get here? Why are we where we are now? Because I think, as I said through that first slide, our side has been just slow to see the problem, to see where the other side's been fighting it. And so we've been really fighting a federal swing state battle generally effectively. I mean, we've won most of the recent presidencies, right? We've had the Senate and the House for most of it. But when you see what the battle really is, you see that's not enough. And if they're doing what they're doing, we're doing what we're doing, and we don't see what they're doing, they're still winning. One thing I always say is, if you thought you were winning and it turns out you weren't, you've got a problem with your battle plan. And so I think now the good news is, again, I don't write all this to be depressing. I actually think the lesson of the last year is, one, their extremism is toxic. It's a loser on election day if we run good campaigns. And number two, when we do run those good campaigns and we're organized and we do rally to a state level attack on democracy like we've done for the last year, it turns out we win. We do win. And so I think that one question I get about halfway through my presentations is, well, David, everything you said makes it sound like it's too late. It's not too late. It's too late if we don't see it, and it's too late if we don't adjust our strategies. But the last year since August in Kansas, since Dobbs, have shown us that actually when we do things state level up, we actually are winning. And that's what we have to do going forward. We have an opportunity of a lifetime in 24. There's risks, obviously, huge risks. But the opportunity is to not just win a presidency, it's to keep going at all these state level races and start building up real momentum for democracy. And this whole extremist side of the right, just get rid of it again and again. Every time we don't run in a district, we're a gift to extremism. Every time we do run, we give us our chance to sort of get rooted out one other time.
A lot of people wonder about different sort of communication methods, techniques. Should I phone bank? Should I text bank? Should I write postcards? Should I be talking on social media? Do you have an opinion about different channels, or is your footprint position sort of broader than that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of varies. Well, the first thing I would do is, before you get to the individual acts you do, think about, is there a group like this group that you are part of, separate from this group, that you could get them all part of it? So before you go into what your daily task, what your direct task is, texting people in Ohio, calling people in Ohio, sending postcards in Ohio, before you do that, go to that footprint. And I'm going to share it real quick. Go to that footprint and think through. Oh, sorry, I can't find it. Think through to yourself. Hold on. Think through, what of my footprint could actually be used to do much bigger communication scale than just me doing it? So do that first. But then I would say it's whatever fits in naturally to what you do. I'll just give an example of how effective it is. My guess is a lot of people on this call helped us in Ohio. Their entire goal was to sneak in an August 8th special election, a totally unpopular idea when no one was watching. They literally projected 8% turnout. And every single text, phone call, you name it, and people sometimes ask, is it bad that it's beyond Ohio? No, not if you're reaching out to Democrats saying, hey, I'm from California. You don't have to say this, but if you said to an Ohioan, I'm so concerned about an attack on democracy in Ohio, I'm writing you, I'm texting you, that's kind of a wake-up call. Everywhere I went between June and August, because I was rolling out this book, I went in June, I was in Boston. People said, hey, we were just doing phone banks to Ohio. In New York, they were sending postcards to Ohio. In other states, text messages. All of it created this intensity that by August 8th led to a 38% turnout. They expected 8%. And that turnout is what saved us in Ohio. So what I love that's happening, and that was the same story in Wisconsin, same story again, going back to Kansas, whatever you can do to take these democracy battles and create a buzz, and I felt it here in Ohio all July and August, to create a massive firestorm so people show up like they did in Ohio, like you're helping us save the day. In whatever way you do it, that's convenient for you, please do. Of course, if you're in an area, door knocking remains the most effective. But if you're not in the area and you can do the other stuff, all of it created this echo chamber in Ohio. Democracy's under attack. Don't not vote. And the turnout was literally almost the same as the midterm and on August 8th, where they thought it'd be 8%. The nationalization of this race and all those volunteers was a big part of making that happen.
Dawn makes a point that is interesting, that there's been a lot of movement, people moving from state to state. So people are ending up in places where maybe they've not re-registered, maybe they've not sorted themselves out. So I assume we can all talk to our friends who are moving around the country to make a difference where you land.
Absolutely. We're all on the front line. I mean, I look back at this and I always think about the Koch brothers. Again, I don't mean to only mention them, but all of them, they've known all this time that the reason they've been winning is in states. And they've been organized in states. Just look at what they're trying to do right now with school boards all over the country. How much they must have loved it while they were organizing in states that we were telling our people, well, unless you're in Pennsylvania or Georgia or one of those swing states, you're not really in the battle. When they are waging the battle right in these people's backyards. So yeah, wherever you move to, you're on the front line. And this is true, again, in blue California, where you could do so much elsewhere, but also let's win those House seats in California. And you could be in the most red state going. And I can give you a mission about why you're on the front line. Those are the tip of the spear. That is where the extremism is literally being advanced. And again, when I was in Oklahoma, job number one is Oklahoma. Job number one in Oklahoma. No more years where 60% of those people get unopposed. Never. We cannot allow that. So there's a clear mission if you're in a red state where extremism is out of control. Again, Oklahoma had a Democratic governor not that long ago. So everywhere you go, yes, I don't care where you move to, you're on the front line. And by the way, and if you're in a rural area that's very red, your voice is even louder. You might call up a state house member. You might give them hell. Don't give them hell, but you might confront them at the grocery store in a way that they're never going to hear it otherwise. And that's the beginning of accountability that the blue folks can't even do. So everywhere we go, we're on the front line.
Cindy makes the point that we're seeing a lot of sort of takeover of school boards. So we should, and these are things that are local and direct for anybody who's a parent or anybody who's got people going through school. What should people be doing about?
Well, I'm going to do a whiteboard on this, but this is one of the greatest examples where their general approach in schools is totally unpopular. Okay. This is not popular. Banning books in almost who wants the angry neighbor down the street telling, I'm a father of young kids, telling my kids what they can read? Nobody. That's like a 65-35% issue. So what I would say, I'm gonna share a chapter here. One thing I do is I create a website called Save Democracy with a lot of the tips in my book that you can access. This is the school boards and the libraries. There's a whole chapter about this in the book. This is an absolute front line in the battle for democracy. So one, go to the school board meetings. When people are showing up to the school board meetings and saying, don't ban books, they are almost always winning the battle. Because in showing up, you represent 2/3 of your community, almost every community. Two, figure out who the book banners are who are running. Because in most cases, when people realize that there's one of these extremists running, the Liberty Mom types, they're losing these races. People don't want extremists in their kids' school boards. That's the last thing they want politicized. But my worry is, and I'm in communities like this all the time, there are all these signs up right now for school board, right? No one knows who's who. So number one is figure out who's who and make sure the book banners are clear who they are. Because if people know it, they won't vote for them. This is again, what they are doing around book banning and censorship is actually quite unpopular. And that's why I think their strategy this time is to sort of sneak in as opposed to being loud about it, because they realize, I mean, I go through this in the book. For a couple of years now, when we had in Ohio, we had an election for our Ohio school board. There were 3 seats in the Ohio school board up. The 3 candidates, even in a bad year for Ohio Democrats, the 3 candidates that supported public schools and said, get rid of the culture wars from the school board, all won. It's just not a winning issue, but we have to be smart enough to sniff it out and to help those candidates who are standing up to those other types of candidates.
To move to a sort of structural element that I think you've talked about before, Bill asked a question about ranked choice voting in front of congressional committees way back in 1929 before being killed. Interestingly, Representative Jamie Raskin, wrote an op-ed yesterday on the need for ranked choice voting. He was motivated by saying it was needed to elect speakers in the House, but he did generalize it to we should have it everywhere, and made a good argument about if you don't, you end up with the wrong people. What do you think of mechanisms like that?
I mean, so I guess I have a little broader take on it, but I generally support primary reform. I think it's the primary process that is leading to so much of the incentives to be an extremist. And I think if you had but the answer is, yeah, you'd have in Ohio, kind of the same process that elected, that kept Sarah Palin from winning in Alaska, a nonpartisan primary, and then a ranked choice runoff of the top 4 or 5 candidates. I'm open to that. And I think if you had it, you might have a Democrat win Ohio or a Republican win Ohio, but you would have an incentive structure that they would actually not want to be viewed as extremists. J.D. Vance, it's scary that he switches his personality depending on what he thinks he needs to do. But if you had a system of a nonpartisan primary and a ranked choice runoff, J.D. Vance would have wanted to be a moderate because that's how he would have won. In a world of partisan primaries, and if they close them, it's more the case, he felt like the way to win would be a Trump guy. And now look, all he does is talk like he's Donald Trump's, other son. So no, I think the incentives that come out of these reforms actually would lead to much more responsible public-minded behavior than what we're seeing right now. I mean, for the Republicans, it's all about the partisan primary. And so getting this gerrymandered system in place, I mean, so much of what's driving the behavior that almost led to the shutdown in May, again, it's all about gerrymandered general elections, partisan primaries, needing to be an extremist. So yeah, that kind of reform, I think, would we got to end gerrymandering also, but that kind of reform could also make a big difference.
I know there are some states that are looking to try and move selecting boundaries away from politicians. Obviously, that's something
we need that. You know. By the way, on the ranked choice voting, whenever they react to something, you're on the right track. In Ohio, they just put forward a bill to get rid of ranked choice voting, to not let it happen. They saw what happened in Alaska. They do not want this coming. But yeah, in the end, and we learned this in Ohio, we've been through the worst 2 years when it comes to gerrymandering. where we had a system that it drew a lot more rules, but in the end, the politicians were still at the table. We have to, as much as we can all move to a system of independent commissions like Michigan and other states, that's the ultimate reform. The politicians simply cannot be trusted. They've shown it again and again to gerrymander. They will break the law before they will gerrymander fairly. We've learned that in Ohio. And if you're in a state that can reform it, take it from a guy who's lived this in Ohio. As much as they'll attack you that you're getting it away from elected officials, get it the hell away from elected officials. They will break the law every time. I'll do a Substack here. This is a review I recently wrote about that in Ohio based on what they did. Well, actually, that's not it. Let me give you a different one. They just finished up another round of this nonsense in Ohio a couple days ago. Secret closed-door meetings, breaking the law, you name it. That's just how they do it. Get it out of their hands as soon as we can. And by the way, one other thing. January 25, if we manage to win the White House, Senate, and House, which I agree with Sue we can do, get them to pass the federal legislation to end gerrymandering once and for all.
So David is putting links to his Substack. And his Another Travesty analysis was really good.
Yeah, that's the one. The first one, ignore that one. But the travesty walks through what happened here.
Yeah, I mean, a precise example of what we're talking about here. Taking a question from Blair and others, what accountability should tech and especially social media companies have in all of this? We live in this sort of swirl of information and disinformation. Do you realistically expect to see changes in the tech and social media area that will better support democracy? Is there any way to lean there?
I hate to say it. I don't see it coming. I think big money and lobbying is so dominant in Washington that I really don't see much good coming from it. I just don't. I mean, so what I would say that we have to do is we use our footprints to get the truth out as best we can. Whatever you're on, whatever network, whatever social media vehicle you use. But I just don't see much coming. I mean, when you stop and take a step back, the idea that one billionaire with Saudi money could take over Twitter and all of a sudden do what he's doing. I mean, there's enough of a public good that there should be someone saying, slow down. There's something really strange here. None of that happens. And I don't see realistically government doing enough to keep up with this stuff. I wish that weren't my answer. Maybe others have a more optimistic take, but and if that happens, great. I mean, I certainly think that folks in Congress should be thinking about, as we used to have in some degree, the old fairness doctrine. But I don't see that. And I think that in the meantime, what we should be doing is using our footprint as much as possible to be champions of truth. And I have a whole chapter on this in the book as well. We're all in the war room. There's a political war room. It used to be very small. But now that there's social media, it's everyone who wants to be in it. Play whatever role. That's why I do my whiteboards. They seem to get shared. People view them, so I do them. Whatever you can do to get a message out, let's get it out there. And lately, again, at the era of being an optimist, in the last year after Dobbs, we've been winning that message. Despite all the crazy social media stuff, people have understood, my God, abortion's at risk here, or democracy's at risk, and I'm showing up to make sure we protect it. So we're winning the battle. And a lot of it is because people individually are spreading the word about what's at stake and how to get involved.
Now, I know you've said that the kind of focusing on just the federal race is kind of a shiny bauble, that finding balance with what we do locally, what we do in the state is what we have to do to be on the right playing field. But various people, Bill, Barbara, others today, have various questions around Trump, around, impact of the 14th Amendment or indictments or convictions. What's your general view of the upcoming presidential election and how we should think about it?
So I don't take anything for granted. Trump would obviously, I mean, I'll just say, like, he's scary as a candidate right now, more than ever before, but I also think that makes him a worse candidate. If you think back to what he was saying in 2016, as crazy and bad as it was somewhat of a forward-looking message about taking places that were struggling and fixing them. His message now is literally just relitigating 2020 and being everyone's retribution. That's really not, I think, in the end. I'll make it as people out. But I actually think that as scary as he is, I think he's also quite beatable in the states that we need to win. My bigger fear, although I don't want to also let it make us all doom and gloom, these third-party efforts, throwing Kennedy in, this no labels group, those worry me because I think in the end, straight up, Biden should beat Trump in a re-election. I just think in the states that we need to win again, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, I just think that we would still be the favorite in those races. In the third party manipulation or interference maybe changes that. But overall, I still feel like that matchup is one that we should win. But as I say all the time, we'll be much better off winning it if we're also running everywhere in these states. And if we run everywhere in these states and we do really well, our victory is more than just beating Donald Trump. And if you've heard anything from me over the last hour, if all we do is beat Donald Trump and nothing else, we're still not really winning, because where we are really losing this battle is beneath the Donald Trump level. Now, if he wins and they have all these state houses, it's clearly horrific. But I just think that it's not a zero-sum game. We do better at the top if we run everywhere, but by running everywhere, we also make the victory far bigger than just beating Trump for the second time.
And people tend to vote up more than they vote down the ticket. So start at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And recruit now. One big area of ownership, and I know a lot of you are in California, so maybe it's not as relevant, but if a lot of you are there, have moved from elsewhere. Everyone take ownership that wherever we can, we will not allow extremists to go unopposed next election. Someone put in North Carolina. There's a new chair in North Carolina doing a great job there. There's a new chair in Iowa doing a great job. But forget the chairs. Wherever we live, going back to where you've moved to or where people you know, look in your own district. Are you in a district that someone ran unopposed last time? If you are, commit. It's not going to happen again. You may not be the candidate, by the way. I'm not saying everyone runs for everything, but you probably know someone who could be the candidate, or a group of people you're part of probably know someone who could be the candidate, and together commit. We are not letting this filing deadline go past unless someone is running. And I have a great example, and I just typed this up just to give a real optimistic note on this. It's going to take 2 minutes, but I think people will like this. I'll send a story. I'll share a story of this. Warren County, Iowa, a county auditor and county auditors in Iowa run elections. Okay. Well, the Iowa, the auditor of Warren County, Iowa, a county that Trump won by 14 points. Okay. The auditor who stepped aside recommended the deputy auditor replace her. The deputy auditor was a woman, happens to be a Democrat. Her name is Kimberly Sheets. Well, the county commission of Warren County, Iowa, chose a Republican buddy of theirs who turned out to be an election denier. Well, this woman who was overlooked, Kimberly Sheets, said, well, I'm more qualified than this guy. I don't want an election denier running our elections in Warren County. And she and a whole lot of volunteers chose to run. And they had to get 2,500 signatures to call the special election. They got the special election on the calendar. And at the end of August, she beat this person by 30 points. She said what we all have to think. She said, I didn't think I was going to win, but I felt like I had to run. It was so wrong that this guy was not qualified, and he's an election denier. She said to me, I felt like I had no choice. We all should feel that way, that we have no choice but to run against extremists running in these districts. We should not feel like it's okay that we don't run. We should feel, and she went on to win. She didn't know she was going to win when she started, but she knew it was so absurd that this guy was going to be the auditor as an election denier. She said, I'm running, and she won. That's how we all have to think about it.
Okay, these are all great models. I'm going to end on 2 questions here, David. First, just a personal question. What on earth do you do to relax? I know you also
write novels. I know you
I paint things.
you paint stuff. That's good. And you also study the behavior of 12-year-olds on a soccer field who have more political thought than many of us.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Like I go to these I'm a very positive fan, but I do get excited at my 7 year. Today I was at a soccer game at about noon. So I'm a very active dad. So I'm always with my kids. That keeps me very relaxed. We have a lot of fun. I do bike. I do paint. And I do try and read a lot of novels too, not just all the serious stuff. And I also write novels, which maybe is a good escape thing. But you know, I think all of us need to find. Oh, you know what I love to do? I'm on the Parks Foundation board of the Ohio State Parks. So I love getting out and hiking and getting around to those scenes too. So I think it's I try and keep a healthy balance. But obviously I also tend to get fired up on democracy too. So it's a good balance.
So that partly answers what will be my final question here, which is the same question I asked you back in January 2022. First quoting John Lewis, right? Freedom is the continuous action we must all take. It is not some plateau where we can sit down at rest. You know, talk to all of us about the sort of the attitudes, the stamina, the practices we need to see this as a long game. You know, how can we get better at the long journey that this is of saving democracy?
In some ways, I think once you see it as a long game, it's almost easier. It's almost more exhausting to do what we've been doing, where we go, and this group obviously does this steadily, but when we go through these spasms of activity for a few months and everything rides on one moment and then we stop for a while, that's almost, we're living on the edge too much when we do it that way. And I think you're better off though thinking the way I try to, which is, okay, we had this election in August. Do what you can do in Ohio. In the next month, what is it, October 1? Whatever you all can do to help in Virginia, let's go win Virginia. 2 seats away. Youngkin will ban abortion if we don't win that. If he wins 2 Senate seats, they will ban abortion. If we win 2 House seats and hold the Senate, they can't. They will do voter suppression or they won't, depending on what we do. So just do some steady work, the kind you're already doing. To hope, don't sit around. If you want to not be stressed, this is a good one, although I do this sometimes. Don't watch the Republican primary debate. None of those people are going to beat Donald Trump. What a waste of your 2 hours watching that nonsense. Forget it. Write some postcards to Virginia instead. Make some calls for this Pennsylvania Democratic candidate for the state Supreme Court. Help us win our amendment in Ohio. And just do it at a steady pace, as opposed to like the way we go about it, which is like, you know, we take a break and then we stress out about the biggest election in the world. And the other one I'd say is similar kind of message. There's so much that we can control and focus on those things. And there's so much we don't control. Like I don't like when the press doesn't cover Biden well when he's on a trip. I have no control over that. So spending a lot of time losing my mind about that is just not a good use of our time when you could be doing the steady work of lifting democracy. The people who helped get that Kimberly Sheets on the ballot to win in that race in Iowa I mentioned, do that kind of work wherever you can, wherever you see it needs to be done. And I also think when you do it that way, it's a good pace. But what we're seeing is you'll see steady victories all along the way if you do it well. That's what we're seeing right now.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming back and talking to us. Wish you well in all your other talks and your work. And I think it behooves all of us to volunteer now and incrementally and use Mobilize and other tools to find. You can be making calls to Tennessee and Pennsylvania today. So the work is out there. Just go dig it out and find it. And once again, I remind you that these are partners that the DVC particularly works with, but any partners will do who are in this struggle together for saving democracy. So go join some. And as David said, do things incrementally and paint in your spare time. Thank you so much, David.
Thanks, everybody. Stay in touch. Really appreciate all you're doing.